Good morning. I'm Janet Farrior and I'm a member of our church. I come to the 9:45 service, so some of you might not have seen me before. But I'm going to read a book to you today called Peter Rabbit. I know a lot of you might have heard of this before, but I want you just to sit back and listen to me. Once upon a time, there were four little rabbits, and their names were Flopsy, Mopsy, Cottontail, and Peter. Remember that name. They lived with their mother in a sandbank underneath the root of a very big fir tree. This book was written in 1902. That was before even your grandparents were born. So some of these words, I'm going to tell you what they are if you don't we don't use a lot of these words right now. "Now, my dears," said old Mrs. Rabbit one morning, "you may go into the fields or down the lane, but do not go into Mr. McGregor's garden. Your father had an accident there. He was put in a pie by Mrs. McGregor. They made him into a rabbit pie. Now run along and don't get into mischief." Mischief means don't get in trouble or don't do anything that's not right. She said, "I am going out." Then old Mrs. Rabbit took a basket and her umbrella. You think she thought it might rain? She went through the wood to the baker's. She bought a loaf of brown bread and 5 currant buns. That's kind of like a good, yummy cinnamon bun. Flopsy, Mopsy, and Cottontail, who were good little bunnies, went down the lane to gather blackberries. Gather is another word for picking. Some of you have probably gone with your mom and picked strawberries or blackberries. But Peter, who was very naughty, he ran straight away to Mr. McGregor's garden and squeezed under the gate. First, he ate some lettuces and some French beans. And then he ate some radishes. I bet a lot of you don't like radishes. I do. And then, feeling rather sick, he went to look for some parsley. Parsley is an herb that a long time ago they would say if you eat parsley, it'll make your stomach feel better. But around the end of a cucumber frame, whom shall he meet but Mr. McGregor? Mr. McGregor was on his hands and knees planting out young cabbages. But he jumped up and ran after Peter, waving a rake and calling out, "You stop, you thief!" Thief is a word that means somebody is stealing something or taking something that does not belong to them. That's not a good thing. Peter was most dreadfully frightened. He rushed all over the garden, for he had forgotten the way back to the gate. He lost one of his shoes among the cabbages, and the other shoe amongst the potatoes. After losing them, he ran on 4 legs and went faster and faster, so that I think he might have got away altogether if he had not unfortunately run into a gooseberry net and got caught by the large buttons that was on his jacket. It was a blue jacket with brass buttons, and it was quite new. Peter gave himself up for lost, and he shed big tears. But his sobs were overheard by some friendly sparrows, that's a bird, who flew into him in great excitement and implored him to exert himself. Mr. McGregor came up with a sieve that's like a shovel, which he intended to pop upon the top of Peter. But Peter wriggled out just as in the nick of time, leaving his jacket behind him. Ooh. He rushed into the tool shed and jumped into a can. It would have been a beautiful thing to hide in if it had not had so much. What do you think was in that can? Water in it. Mr. McGregor was quite sure that Peter was somewhere in the tool shed, perhaps hidden underneath a flower pot. He began to turn them over and over and over, hoping to find Peter. Presently, Peter sneezed. Mr. McGregor was after him in no time and tried to put his foot upon Peter. He wanted to stomp him. Peter jumped out of a window, upsetting 3 plants. The window was too small for Mr. McGregor, and he was tired of running after Peter, and he went back to his work. Peter sat down to rest. He was out of breath, and he was so scared he was just trembling. He was frightful, and he had not the least idea which way to go, and he was very damp from sitting in that can. Damp means that he was kind of wet. After a time, he began to wander about, going lippity, not very fast, and looking all around. Who do you think he was still looking for? He was scared to death of Mr. McGregor. He found a door in a wall, but it was locked, and there was no room for a fat little rabbit to squeeze underneath. An old mouse was running in and out over the stone doorstep, carrying peas and beans to her family to the wood. Peter asked her the way to the gate, but she had such a large pea in her mouth. She couldn't do anything but shake her head. And Peter began to cry. Does that sound like a rabbit crying? Then he tried to find his way straight across the garden, but he became more and more puzzled. Puzzled means he just didn't know what was going on. His mind was all mixed up. He came to a pond where Mr. McGregor filled his water cans. A white cat was sitting staring at some goldfish. She sat very, very still, looking, and then the tip of her tail twitched as if it were alive. Peter thought it best to go away without speaking to her. He had heard things about cats from his cousin, Benjamin Bunny. He went back towards the tool shed, but suddenly, quite close to him, he heard the noise of a hoe. Scratch, 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 and Peter scuttered underneath the bushes. But presently, as nothing happened, he came out and climbed upon a wheelbarrow and peeped around to see if he could see, and he saw Mr. McGregor hoeing, but not right close by. His back was turned toward Peter, and beyond him was the gate. Peter got down very quietly off the wheelbarrow and started running as fast as he could, doing a straight walk behind some black currant bushes. Remember, black currants are like blackberries. Mr. McGregor caught sight of him at the corner, but Peter did not care. He slipped underneath the gate and was safe at last in the wood outside the garden. Mr. McGregor hung up the little jacket and the shoes for a scarecrow to frighten the blackbirds. Peter never stopped running or looking behind him till he got home. He was so tired that he flopped down upon the nice soft sand on the floor of the rabbit hole and shut his eyes. But his mother was busy cooking, and she wondered what had he done with his clothes. It was the second little jacket that she had gotten for him and a pair of shoes that Peter had lost in a fortnight. I'm sorry to say that Peter was not very well that evening. His mother put him to bed and made him some chamomile tea, and she gave a dose of it to Peter, 1 tablespoonful to be taken at bedtime. But Flopsy, Mopsy, and Cottontail had bread and milk and blackberries for supper. Poor, poor Peter. And that's the end of our story. I hope you enjoyed it. Have a good day.